Welcome back, everybody, to After Action Project. This is episode 100. We finally did it, like 8 years later. Your host tonight, as always, Andy Montoya, and myself, Jeremy Gill. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Aaron Jannetti joining us from Knife Control Concepts. We're going to be discussing his Foundations of Control course. All right. Did you guys get that mute or that echo as well?
No, clear on my end.
All right, cool. I had a little audio difficulties there. Way to interrupt and ruin probably the best introduction I've ever done on this thing. Awesome. And his student, David Bowling, will be discussing that class together. Before we get into it, I'm going to remind y'all about our show sponsors, Locked In Grip, lockedingrip.com. Have you ever lost that perfect grip after shooting several rounds, or had your sweaty grip diminish the ability to hang onto your firearm in different weather conditions? Locked In Grip is a grip enhancer that keeps your hands free of moisture to create a slip-free connection to the action of shooting your firearm. Locked In Grip Shooting Sports Chalk is made for shooters by shooters. Visit lockedingrip.com. That's lockedingrip.com to purchase your liquid shooting sports chalk now. It's a great product. I absolutely use it during my training and my practice sessions. On the rare occasion that I get out there and shoot a match, I definitely make sure that I have my Locked In Grip. So it's a great product. We'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the show. And our other show sponsor is the Range Buddy app, rangebuddy.app, available on Android and iOS. It's a collection of over 160 handgun shooting drills, sorted by the required target type and filterable by the skills that you want to work on. Hopefully by next episode, we'll have a big announcement for an update that we've been working on there that I think you all will enjoy. In the meantime, download it for iOS or Android. That's rangebuddy.app. So let's get into tonight's episode. Aaron, introduce yourself to our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about the Knife Controls Concept course, just kind of like a brief introduction, and then what got you into the training space.
Yeah, my name's Aaron Janneti. I run a training center in Columbus, Ohio. We deal primarily with like open hand resolutions for things. So, people might look at that in the combative section of things. So even though we use knives and guns and stuff like that, we do kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, we have our self-defense program. And then most of the problems that we're solving when it does come to the weapons comes inside of the entanglement or in close range type stuff. So that's where we, specialize. I've trained in Krav Maga, Kali, Muay Thai, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, a little bit of everything. And then a plentiful background with firearms and knife skills and things like that. But biggest thing has just been, I've been coaching, training for 16 years, and have, I think everybody falls into areas where they're super inquisitive about things. They run into problems that challenge them a little more and they dive deeper into it. And knife defense is, let's be realistic, man. It's terrifying. Even the best things that we've come up with and we've trained, it's still a shit show. So it's a fascinating topic for us, and we're continually looking to try to evolve what that is. And that's essentially what drove the Knife Control Concepts program, that we travel around the country and teach with, is solving that problem of how to realistically teach people how to handle an entanglement against a blade. We kind of reverse engineer, where a lot of martial arts or a lot of self-defense programs will teach kind of like the whole thing. You'll hear like overhand knife defense, underhand knife defense. And it's a lot of times it's a sequential order to go through things. There's an A, B, C, D, and you get off track. We reverse engineered it. We teach people how to manage the close quarters aspect of it, just the entanglement. And that's where KCC1, the Foundations of Control program, is. It's all grappling based. That's not to say that we think that's the only way to solve the problem. It's just, we think that's the hardest part of dealing with a blade, is if you're stuck in the entanglement. I can't get to my weapons just yet. I can't escape just yet. I don't have clean strikes just yet. So we solve that problem first, and then we start to walk our way out of it, and we start to implement striking and weapons access and things back that way. So that was the development of the KCC program, how we started breaking down the different levels of training, and honestly is a program between myself and two others that we're still continually, trying to evolve. And that's the beauty of getting out and working with people hands-on. Like, Dave and I had the opportunity to train together at the Combative Summit down in Florida last September, and getting an opportunity to get feedback in person live with people that are using this stuff hands-on, from corrections officers and law enforcement, to people that are just in bad neighborhoods and have had a couple of knives pulled on them. So that's, I guess, the general quick rundown of what I do currently and kind of how I got to that space.
Love it, man. And David, introduce yourself to our listeners. You're probably one of the few dudes that I see very actively working on their skills, whether it be jujitsu, handgun, and it's been kind of cool to sit back and have attended some events in the past together. And so it's really cool to see all that you're doing. So introduce yourself to our listeners and what brought you to the Knife Control Concepts course.
David Bowling. I'm retired military. Like Aaron mentioned, we actually met last September at the Combative Summit through John Valentine. I'm a student of John Valentine's and trained with him, and I had followed Aaron on social media for couple of years, and so it was an opportunity at the summit to be able to actually, take a small. I mean, it was 4 hours ish. I mean, it was really just a very, very small piece of his curriculum, but it takes the concepts and the principles of self-defense in his particular case in a knife scenario, and works from those concepts and principles. Instead of do A, do B, do C, it's, hey, here's a concept, work this concept and figure out for yourself how to do, how to defend it and how to work through a position, which is much more practical than do A, do B, do C, because the bad guy always gets a vote. So after getting disenfranchised with traditional martial arts, I started looking more towards the combatives realm of pressure testing things and really working. And Knife Control Concepts really fits into that niche of pressure testing things. And if it doesn't work, then either try something else or just discard it altogether. And there's a lot of stuff out there in the traditional world that just doesn't work. If I'm throwing a punch at half speed so that you can block it, and you block it 100% of the time, when I throw it at full speed, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to block it. And so you have to both work at full speed in order to understand what's going to work.
Aaron, I want to dig into that a little bit more. So how do you structure your courses in such a way where your students can safely participate to where they're pressure testing their skills without doing that? Give me your 50%, I'm going to give you 100%, and we're going to feel good about this. What are some of the challenges you have structuring your course in such a way that you can get legitimate, some of that pressure testing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Normally when people, in my experience, and again, as long as I've been around and as many places as I've gone and trained, I'm still limited in what I know. There's tons of stuff I have yet to experience. And so in my experience with training, when you look at pressure testing, more commonly, you'll find two buckets. One is they don't pressure test anything or enough, and then you end up with a lot of choreographed style training, and in a lot of false confidence that ends up getting wrecked the second they run into, some dude with a pissed off attitude and a blue belt. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where you're overutilizing pressure testing. You're essentially gamifying it to a certain point, and it's really just dudes beating the shit out of each other, and nobody's actually learning anything. So the real challenge, in my experience, is how do you gradually work people towards what we refer to essentially as like meaningful intensity at any point in time. And we use the analogy oftentimes with meaningful intensity of shooting, and you all shoot. I imagine a lot of your listeners shoot. So if I go out to the range and I put 200 rounds down range and every single round hits exactly where I wanted to hit, yeah, that's a great session, but it's most likely a wasted training session. I didn't learn anything. I didn't push the limits on anything. I didn't push myself to some type of a failure that I could actually attempt to change things or benefit from it. if I go to the range and I put 200 rounds down range and I hit 20 out of 200, well, I probably didn't learn shit either, because now I'm pushing things too fast or probably doing things too chaotically. So the idea is to kind of push towards the outer limits, to spend, again, for lack of a better term, 80-20 principle. The majority of the time, I should be winning. I should be successful in what I'm doing. And I should also have to A, work for that, and B, I should fumble a little bit. And that level of testing or meaningful intensity is going to be different person to person. And that, to your point, to your question, makes it a very interesting dynamic when I go out and, let's say, Mike and I are at a seminar and there's 30 people there, and you have 30 different backgrounds in a hand-to-hand combat situation. I have somebody that might not have any training. I have somebody that might be, I have 10 years of MMA. I have somebody else coming from law enforcement, military. So you have different training backgrounds. Well, if you run out and you, in my experience, my opinion, if you pressure test for the sake of pressure testing, you're not learning. My job, anytime I go out and we do a 2-day end user course, like we're going to be doing in New Mexico in June, I've got 12 hours. And the idea in the 12 hours is to take people's level of understanding and competency up, and then set them up in a way that they're going to need continual training. So how do they actually benefit from the material we get to? If I spend that time just beating the hell out of them without meaning, then honestly, they wasted their money. They might have had a fun experience. They might have some cool videos to put on social media, but we're not necessarily pushing them forward. So the dynamic to us with that 80-20 principle idea is we teach things right out of the gate. Like, you have to have a jump off point. So if we're going to explore a concept of, let's say, a 2-on-1, very generic concept, not necessarily specific position, but just the idea of getting two limbs catching on and holding on to one limb to try to control it, right? If we're going to explore an idea of a 2-on-1 and the people we're working with have zero knowledge of any type of grappling or anything combative in that space, I have to give them something. So we teach, first and foremost, we're going to lay out a couple positions and technical aspects. But what we do is we teach it a little more concept based so that different body types can adjust to different positions. We work that against relatively static players. And then very quickly, we start getting them moving and dynamic. The static portions of the seminars are very, very, very short. Even in the 2-hour block that I was able to do out at the summit, Dave can attest to that. It's like, hey, here's this shirt grab methodology we were going to work with. We're going to work a couple of reps against a buddy that's not really moving much. And then very quickly, they're moving around, tussling, framing on you, pulling on you, and you're trying to figure out how to apply that same technique and same concept against energy. So what we essentially do is like add in little bits of variables and little bits of energy piece by piece. And then we just do essentially an assessment. How is the individual doing? Are they still able to maintain inside of that 80-20 principle? Are they knocking it out of the park? Cool. We need to increase the intensity a little bit farther, add a different variable into the mix to challenge them a little bit. If they're struggling, then, hey, this might be about where they're at for this case. We're going to allow them still to move against some things, but we need to pull back the overall energy with it. So it's not a matter of just beating the hell out of them and letting them know that if you got attacked today by an insanely aggressive and also talented individual with a knife, that you're screwed. The idea is knife situations or violent situations in general are incredibly dynamic. They have tons of variables. Yes, there are some general statistics we can go into about how often they grab your clothes and how often they stab overhand or underhand. But realistically, I don't know what card I'm going to draw today. So we have to learn against energy. And for us in a learning model, we need to learn against energy that matches the student in any given case. And so we push those variables up against the individual piece by piece by piece. And then at the end of a day's session for us, so like we do a 6-hour day, 2 6-hour days for our KCC1 course, the very last thing we do is more of a free attack. The kicker is, since KCC1 is a grappling-based segment, you're not allowed to leave the entanglement. So we actually force you to stay in the entanglement longer than you should ever stay inside of the entanglement. But it forces you to actually be able to navigate the dynamics of those scenarios. So that then becomes essentially your assessment of what did you pick up from the day, what actually landed, how much improvement did you make from the beginning of the course towards the end of the course, and are we following that in line with what you were supposed to be learning today? And then moving forward based off that person, like for instance, with the three of y'all with handgun experience, then, if I was working with you individually, then we put our guns on. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, how do we use these concepts to get to a very specific case, which might be weapons access? right? And then that's how we start to pressure test into those areas. So again, in my experience and in my opinion, pressure testing gets limited piece by piece to the individual. But where most people fall short is they either push pressure testing way too high, way too fast, and either people get frustrated, they don't come back, they might get injured, and that's not making them any safer. Or you have the other end of the spectrum where they're not pressure testing, period, and everything feels great and it's fine. And, I can do an overhand knife defense against somebody that stabs in a perfect angle one and doesn't recoil and doesn't punch me and doesn't try to change angles and things like that. And so finding that kind of gradient in the middle takes time. That's where the concepts come in instead of being overly technical. And that's where learning how to drop little nuggets of energy piece by piece in a progressive manner is really what gets people pushing. So we're able to challenge the novice people in a class all the way up to, third, fourth, fifth degree black belts that have been grappling and wrestling for a very long time. It's actually been a very interesting experience for us.
So, Aaron, tell us about the prerequisites of this course. Can somebody that's brand new, out of the box, come in and take this class with somebody like David who has some experience, or is there, or what does that look like, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. So honestly, I had a gentleman that flew out from like Texas all the way to Connecticut to take one of our courses, and he had never done a martial art in his life. He was in his later 40s. I want to say he was like 46, 47. But he had never done a martial art in his life, never done any combatives training, no self-defense training. And he did perfectly fine. And again, that goes back to the methodology and the way the information is delivered. Because it's not meant to be, or I should say, take the negative out of that and look at the positive, because it is meant to be a program that progresses you from wherever you are at to something higher. What we can do is we can meet you at your level. And if I can take somebody that's never been in a fight and get them to at least understand, oh, wow, this is what the dynamic energy looks like. This is what it's going to take to get good at this stuff. And, oh, by the way, we give you an online training program for free if you attend our seminars. You have full access to us at any point in time so that you continue to actually practice this stuff going forward. And it's something you actually get good at. And I think, again, that's the main kicker. There's no one goes to a 2-day seminar. Nobody goes to a 5-day training and comes out the other end good. You come out the other end with more exposure to content. And then what you do after that training is really what matters. So somebody that comes into the course that, let's say, has 15 years of grappling and maybe has shot and done a little bit of boxing, so they understand fighting in general, they're going to have a different outlook of what they need to improve upon after a 2-day training. Somebody that comes through and they're brand new, or, let's say as a novice in that territory, they're going to have a completely different set of things that they need to accomplish. However, every single one of those body types can move together and work together in the training environment. And we take that into account as we're working with these, what we would consider end user courses, the ones that are just open to the general public. So long answer short, anybody can come into the training. I mean, we've had ages 12 all the way up to 77 in the course. And we have had people with 0 training experience up to people that, to be completely honest, if we touched up in a grappling rule set, would absolutely murder me. However, it's this very specific context of the niche we're trying to accomplish, which is dealing with an edged weapon, that they're coming away going like, well, crap, I didn't think about that. And that's a different way to apply this 2 to 3 decades of training, the knowledge that I already have. So it's a really fascinating thing, because I have taught seminars and styles in the past that weren't that accessible to lower levels, especially knife defense. The way I used to teach, and I'll make comments about traditional martial arts and traditional ways that self-defense programs often teach knife stuff. And I'm teaching it based off my history, because I was that guy for a long time. The first probably 8 to 10 years that I taught very technically, because that's how I was originally introduced to it. And it took a long time to start figuring out this kind of concept-based training as it goes. But that methodology and ideology of, well, this is a very specific technique. So if you don't already know A, B, C, and D, you're screwed. We don't have that the way we're drilling it now. We're allowed to take people that have no background and go, holy crap, look what we got you in a very short period of time.
I want to get David's perspective and thoughts on how this kind of blends with your former experience in the martial arts. I know that you trained jiu-jitsu. So David, how do you feel that this complemented your current skill set going into it?
Well, it absolutely complements the self-defense aspect. Despite what a lot of people say, and I'll probably get some hate about this, but jiu-jitsu has moved away from the true self-defense that it, may have started with at one point. You see a lot of sport-based, and you see what they consider self-defense, but again, it's scripted, choreographed moves of A and B, and this really moves away from that. Where you can take somebody that doesn't have any background at all, which is almost better. I mean, you guys both teach pistol, and sometimes it's easier to teach pistol to somebody who's never shot before than it is to teach somebody who learned from their mother, their father, their brother, sister, whatever, learned in the military, and they developed all these bad habits, and then they come to you and you have to break those habits. It's the same kind of thing here. You have somebody that comes in that doesn't have a background, and you don't have any bad habits to break. You have just a raw lump of clay to work with. And this really did fit. I try to come into it with a student mind and not bring everything that I have in the past. And so it really fit, but also it translates very well to the pistol. It doesn't just have to be about knife control concepts. It can be about weapons access in general. And the niche that I'm really looking for is the teaching people to protect their concealed weapon, typically a pistol, but it could be anything, because there's not a lot of people who are teaching concealed carriers how to protect their weapon. There's a lot of people who teach concealed carry classes, and there's a lot of people carrying concealed, but there's not a lot of people who are being anything other than a holster for somebody else if they get into a fight. And this fits really well with protecting my pistol. Everything that I have to understand about controlling somebody coming at me with a weapon, I can then turn around and use to protect my weapon and keep them from taking it, and using it against me. Which is what I really, that's what attracted me to Aaron's online content to start with, is that I saw something that was very, very beneficial and that I thought would be very useful, that I could then start to piece together and play with before we actually trained in person. So that's where I see it fitting for me.
Like it. I want to kind of in that same vein, Aaron. What's the typical student body makeup of this course? What does that look like? I know earlier on you were talking about you have former military, some law enforcement guys. Are you seeing some civilian Jane Does and John Does, or kind of who's your student?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting one, because what we've noticed is we definitely have a specific following, and we certainly get a decent amount of military and law enforcement. However, the vast majority of the people that are attending at least the end user courses are general civilians. What's neat about what we've noticed in the way that we set courses up is that usually, we get hosted by someone, right? So for instance, Dave reaching out and saying, hey, what's it got to take to get you to New Mexico? I say, well, we just need a facility, and we kind of set up the standards for that. And so what's interesting about it is it oftentimes comes down heavily influenced by who the host is. So for instance, when we're, again, I mentioned Connecticut, when we're out with Rob Mago in Connecticut, who has an incredible program for law enforcement officers called Officer Survival Series. But when we're out there, because of his background and his influence, and when he promotes the course, we're going to see a decent amount of law enforcement officers, especially from Connecticut, Massachusetts, that whole entire area. When we were in Los Angeles in January, February, it was almost exclusively civilian, right? So, and it was a big class. We had about 30 people in the Los Angeles, in a packed into a relatively small place. And the vast majority were civilians, a couple of law enforcement officers in there, a couple of buddies of mine from previous courses, but nonetheless, a lot of it comes down to the influence of the host and where we're at location wise. Obviously, we do in-service training and things like that as well, so we get direct exposure to law enforcement departments and things like that. However, what's interesting about kind of where we positioned ourselves, to Dave's point, as he was mentioning earlier, is when we go out and we approach the content, our goal is to supplement and improve whatever everybody already knows. So we don't take the stance of, hey, throw everything out the window. We have all the answers. We actually go into it and go, look, if you are a law enforcement officer and you have a series of cuffing techniques that you've used for the last 2 decades, don't change that stuff. It's at this part, it's relatively nuanced. We're going to help you get there. We're going to help you get there cleaner. We're going to supplement whatever it is you're working on and get you there. Hey, if you come from a Krav Maga background, I have an idea of what you're starting with. So, hey, this is where you would jump off, and this is where we make that a lot better. And because of that, we honestly do attract a wide variety of individuals. And I think a piece of that is because we're not coming out and saying like, hey, screw everybody else, we are the way. We're coming out and saying, hey, we've done a pretty good job. We've seen very good results out of people. We'd love to help you benefit from it, no matter what your background is. And we end up getting, a decent intrigue and enticement out of, your first responders and, your military group, but also a ton of, jiu-jitsu practitioners that they're running into some similar experiences like Dave's talking about, where they realize like, hey, jiu-jitsu is great. And there's a lot I can take to self-defense from jiu-jitsu. However, from a context standpoint, we aren't talking about somebody stabbing me, and I want to know how to apply these skills in that case. So we get a ton of people from the jiu-jitsu community, a ton of people from the MMA community, a ton of people from the Krav Maga community. And the vast majority of them are just civilians, no law enforcement background. They just want to learn how to protect themselves and their families.
That makes sense, and I appreciate the clarification on there. I want to kind of I want to get into the misconceptions around knife attacks and knife defenses, and before we do that, I wanted to get David, what was probably the biggest misconception that you had coming into this class? If you had one. I know you're pretty level-headed, and I think you have a pretty realistic understanding of skills and abilities.
Like a lot of folks, I was in the camp of thinking that I was better off than I really was. And you hear, hey, if you get a knife fight, get ready to get cut. Maybe not. But I honestly thought that I was going to be in a much better place to be able to work through 2-on-1s, work through shirt grabs, and found that I still have a lot of work to do. I am not as prepared as I thought that I was. So again, I, reached out to Aaron and said, hey, you want to bring this show to New Mexico? Let's, it's much easier for me to bring him to New Mexico and rustle up 15 other people than it is for me to, pay to travel someplace else, to take the same class. So if I can bring people to New Mexico, I will.
Love it. Aaron, what are some of the other misconceptions? I tell people that, hey, that for some folks that are, and this might be, an old wives' tale, but for folks that are in the know, if it's within striking distance, they'd rather be presented a gun than a bad guy with a knife. Is there some truth to that? And let's talk about some of the misconceptions that people have surrounding knife attacks and knife defense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes on, and the problem oftentimes is that most people that are making, these comments and things like that, their exposure and their experience widely comes from television or bad training. Again, most of us are blessed. We're not going to actually run into a lot of incredibly deadly, violent situations, as terrifying as we think the world is right now. So a lot of ignorance, and by definition, ignorance, not slandering on anybody, but by definition is what you don't know, you just don't know. And I think no matter what we're talking about, like to your point or the question there about like, hey, inside of, 2 arms reach, I'd rather be presented with a gun than a knife. The reality of the situation is the question is going to come down to, well, what's your skill set? And then what's the skill set and the intent of the guy with the gun? Because I can show you numerous videos of knife situations in close quarters and gun situations in close quarters with 2 ridiculously untrained individuals, and they're fine. No one gets hurt. And then I can show you the same exact type of people, and somebody gets mutilated with a gun, somebody, gets a gun taken, gets shot, somebody gets stabbed up with a knife. There's so many variables that go into it. It's kind of one of those things. I used to say that exact line, like, look, in close quarters, I would take my chances with a gun over a knife. I don't want to sit there and say like, oh, if somebody pulled a gun on me in close quarters, I'd be fine. I mean, that's just foolish. If you're in close quarters and you have somebody that's willing to kill you, that fight's going to suck. It doesn't matter what the situation is there, but it doesn't take much skill, background, and knowledge to use a sharp object to stab somebody. We use knives pretty commonly. We cut food with them. We open boxes with them. So we're pretty well versed with them. They don't run out of ammo. They don't malfunction. And so as long as you have a decent grip on it, and they're terrifying, so they make people want to get the hell away from you. And you can go back to plenty of, eyewitness accounts of I've been stabbed multiple times. I didn't even know I was getting stabbed. So there's even an element of the bang bang from the gun sets off a lot of alarms and gives you a little bit of like, oh shit, I should be paying attention to that. Or sometimes we don't even know with the knife. So there's a lot of elements that make knives terrifying in their own right. So from a misconception standpoint, I think anybody that attempts to give an absolute in any form about how to deal with a knife, I think it is just ignorant or foolish. They either haven't been tested relatively hard, or they've just never trained, period. Because realistically, you could pull out the 15 or 21 foot drill and say, well, absolutely never draw your gun inside of these ranges. And it's like, okay, well, it's not really a never situation. It's like, statistically speaking, if they could cover this amount of distance in that same spot. So understand the statistics, but to stand on any situation and go, well, this is definitely what's going to happen anytime a knife is involved is just foolish. You could be lucky. I say lucky enough, God forbid no one ever gets attacked. But if you do get attacked, it could be lucky that they don't know what they're doing. They're not super intent on actually killing you. Oh, and by the way, they also have a dull blade. Like, that would be a great fight. And you could be terrible at defending yourself and still survive that. I can show you 3 videos of that exact thing. One I just posted a couple of weeks ago on our page of a guy, I believe in New York, but he's robbing a store at knife point. And the guy behind the counter pulls out a knife, and they're both stabbing at each other with knives, but they're slashing at each other, and no one got injured. No one got cut. The one dude was slashing with the back of the knife. He didn't realize the blade was facing the wrong direction. And the other dude was slashing at him. He had a big, thick coat on. And the fight is chaotic. It looks relatively ridiculous. They're definitely untrained. But realistically speaking, no one got hurt in that situation, right? So, again, like, there are tons of misconceptions. Definitely the idea of like, I'm just going to pull my gun out and shoot them. Okay. People that say that have never been in a close quarters situation and tried to access their firearm. I will just run. A lot of anecdotes and misconceptions. A lot of anecdotes and misconceptions around that. Well, it's like, okay, well, now you're in an elevator. What are you going to do? You can't run. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of I would just, and I think anybody that starts that way, like, I would just do this, you should just do that. If those words come out of your mouth, you're probably going to say something pretty ignorant and not based off any knowledge. So, there's plenty of misconceptions through martial arts and things like that. The reality of it is you got to learn how to fight. And it's a perishable skill. And that's the other thing I think a lot of people lose, right? Where, okay, cool, maybe you have 5 years of, wrestling and kickboxing and MMA, but if you haven't trained in 5 years, that skill is not as accessible as it used to be. So the idea really in training, and this should be with firearms, this should be with offensive weapons, knives, whatever, but also open hand, obviously with us, is that it should be a never ending journey of progress, no matter what. And that should be the only way you approach, if we want to stick to the knife control, the knife conversation, the only way you should approach knife defense is that no matter where you're at right now, you need more. And I feel that way. And I teach this stuff, nonstop. I mean, it's my full-time job, and I travel around, and every time I get, in an evolution with, let's say, like a Craig Douglas course, or we run force on force scenarios, at our gym, I'm always walking away from every one of those scenarios being like, man, there's some stuff I could fine tune. Man, if I miss that strike that one time, my kid could be on the other end of that, and that's a problem. Like, it's, if you leave any knife defense training going, I got this, and I'm definitely locked in, then that to me is the biggest problem anybody can have. So that's a very long way to say any thought you have around a knife other than they're terrifying, I should really train a lot to figure out how they are, and I should pressure test that training, is probably foolish. Right? If you want to pull some statistics, that's fine. You can have those arguments. But realistically, you don't know what cards you're going to draw at any given time, so you need to be as prepared as possible.
Listening to your answer there, I was going back to, watching Varg Freeborn when he came out and explained his scenario, and man, he went through some pretty tough stuff. And one thing that always hit me that he would say, and hopefully I get it right. So if he ever watches this and he says that's not what I said, well, sorry, that's what I assumed. He said that he didn't want to carry a knife anymore because of how bad it went for him, and going down the legal battle of being somebody who had to defend himself with a knife. He wouldn't carry a knife again for self-defense. And, I certainly respect that opinion of what he says, but at the same time, like you said, a knife is such a common used tool. We often have it much more than a gun. So it makes a lot of sense to me to be able to have some skill in order to utilize that tool, even if maybe you don't necessarily always carry a knife for specifically self-defense or anything like that. So I like your thought process on getting that. David, so tell me about that as well. I want you to kind of dive into it and give your thought process as far as carrying a knife and all that, because, us gun guys, we've said it more than once, and I've heard it, I've said it. A knife scares me much more than a gun does, just because of its ability and quote unquote nastiness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's two reasons that I carry a knife. One, there are places that I can't take a handgun that I can take a knife. And so I have some mechanism by which I can defend myself. And two, if I'm in a situation where I'm in the fight, for whatever reason, I've allowed myself to be in a situation that I should have extricated myself from, and we're in an entangled fight, drawing my pistol may not be the right answer. If I'm on my back, somebody's on top of me, drawing my pistol may not be possible. But a small fixed blade knife carried in front of the hips is almost always accessible and can be used to diminish, somebody, to make space, to use jujitsu to stand up, and potentially then to go to guns. So it's I don't like the term, primary, secondary weapon, something like that, but it is. It's a fallback plan for when I've allowed myself to be in a situation where I can't use my pistol.
We had a situation here in New Mexico recently where a law enforcement officer tragically lost his life. He was responding to a disturbance call. Have you seen that video, Aaron?
Yeah, that's
tough to watch.
It's a painful one to watch, and it's an interesting one because it really highlights it kills a lot of the arguments you hear on the internet. But you almost, because of how brutal that video is to watch and to show, you almost don't want to use it, as a good example of it. it's yeah, that's a rough one, man.
Yeah, I'm usually, I don't know if I'm just desensitized to watching those types of videos, but it struck me. And I remember thinking, just kind of being shocked at the violence of it. And it kind of raises the question, is there a general not rule of thumb, but is there a general set of tactics or responses that we can have? And we're looking at that specific, because everybody quotes the Tooler drill, and I'm like, it's not how knife attacks start. You don't have a guy waving a knife at 21 feet and running at you. It's the guy that, very much like in that video where he takes a few steps towards the officer, he presents this knife. The officer really had no reason to suspect it to turn violent. And it did in a relatively short period of time. Is that a situation? And I don't want to armchair quarterback this situation, but are we looking at closing the distance and trying to control that? At what point do we have to abandon the idea that we're going to create space and we might have to go on the offensive and close the distance, or use some other methods other than, hey, just trying to create space?
Yeah. So a couple of things on that. Like, one, no matter what, you can't start coming up with an answer until there's a problem. And to your point, anybody who has actually taken the time to watch that video, from the moment that anybody realizes there's a problem, he's stabbed in the neck 2 seconds later. And it's so, again, you say, I don't want a Monday morning quarterback and things like that. It's 100% true, because you can say whatever you want. You can have whatever training and background you want. But if you're not there in that moment, dealing with not only the physical variables that are going on inside of that situation, but you never know the variables that are inside of, the individuals either, right? Like that officer, was he at the end of his shift? Did he just work a double because the department's behind? Has he not slept in a couple of days? Does he have stuff going on at home? So there's so many variables that can slow down and cause, friction cognitively, let alone on top of how fast and violent that situation was. It went from, a calm interaction. The guy wasn't really moving, responding in any way, to presented knife stabbed. So again, it's easy to sit back and say, well, I would have done this and this and this, and what do we want to do? But I also, to your point, it's necessary, because we don't learn any other way. You know what I mean? And there's plenty of good videos to watch that are going to show you good things. But, those ones that hit you, and Jeremy, I'm right there with you, man. I've watched, I traveled around the country and taught civilian courses for dealing with active shooter situations. And the amount of just body cam footage and security camera footage that I watched through, you get to a point where you're just like, oh yeah, that happened. And, and then it's like, you have a video like that. Like the one that really got me and actually kind of pulled my eyes, I know it's a little off topic, but was the New Zealand shooter, the mosque shooting, and the guy videotaped the whole entire thing and live streamed it. That knocked me back, right? And then I kind of went back into rhythm, watching videos again, and then this is the most recent one that got you. So, but it happens so fast. It's good to learn to look at that, right? Don't step in there and say, I would have done this differently. You step in there and say, if I was in that situation, how maybe could I have survived that? And I think that's the question you're asking. A couple of things. First and foremost, again, there is an element of just, again, call it bad luck, call it drawing a shitty hand, whatever you want to be. In certain circumstances, there's an overwhelming amount of variables that cannot be overcome. And in the case of a law enforcement officer, where if he doesn't know or have any reason to suspect that it's an actual violent threat, he's not going to give commands with his gun from 30 feet away, because, the Tooler drill said, don't be within 21 feet because the guy might potentially have a knife. Right. So they have to get in there. They have to get out, and they have to get closer to people and things like that. And in those cases, when something goes from 0 to 100 that fast, oftentimes there's a toggle switch that has to be able to go like, oh crap, this is going bad. What are my options? If we are looking at that and we're saying, what are some tactics that maybe aren't, that could be trained to benefit One, I think a lot of people get in a habit, and this is in a training scar. This isn't anything on the officer. This is a training scar. But we get in a habit of backpedaling a lot in training. And you will never run backwards as fast as somebody will run forward. And that's one case where if it is something where I do need to make space, actually spending time practicing to turn your hips, which seems crazy at points, like I'm going to turn my back to somebody trying to stab me. But if my goal is to make space and get to my firearm, the fastest you are going to move is turning and run in the direction you want to run, right? So there's an element to that. If you don't have that option, there's nowhere behind, it's already on top of you, closing space or making blocks or protecting vulnerable spaces on the body becomes very imperative. However, if the majority of your training is, oh shit, this is a dangerous threat, I'm going to go to my gun, we have a tendency to draw our hands away from the fight to go find the weapon. And in a case like that, where, if I'm in that close, there's something to bear that in that range, going directly to the weapon and acting like the weapon's going to solve all of my problems in that case can get a lot of us injured, right? So there's an element of training, and I'll do this with our group, my advanced students here at our facility, because I see them every week, so I can do whatever the hell I want with them, over decades of training. But we'll have them put on their concealed carry, a gun, a knife, whatever it is, training versions of it. So no live weapons. We're very safe. And make them run through scenarios where they never get to take their weapons out, so that they're just learning how to train open hand while wearing a weapon and starting to break some of that reaction and response time that every problem needs solved by the weapons and tools that I'm carrying, just to give them, a chance at moving at that. So there's an element to that, which is like, look, if I know if I can make space or I want to make space, I got to run as fast as I can. And I run best when I'm facing the direction I'm trying to run. So teaching myself to turn, pivot, and run. Now that's assuming you're also physically fit. And in the private sector, that in and of its own right is a problem. Then you have the element of, well, I don't have time to get away, or I'm choosing to stay in closer. They've already covered space, whatever that is. And it's like, okay, well, my hands might be the thing that can then buy me time, right? Where I get defensive wounds on the arms, and maybe I can protect the things that are going to make me bleed out, super fast. In the case of a law enforcement officer, if they're wearing any type of body armor or protection, I've got to protect the vulnerable places where, a blade can get to me. And that's going to be like up into the armpits, brachial stuff, into the neck. So it's like, crap, I got to learn how to protect that stuff. And my hands going down to my tool belt doesn't help that. So teaching people to understand that element of it in close, and that's going to come from drilling and scenarios. That's not techniques. It's, you got to put people in a bunch of these situations, recreating some of that cognitive friction, the mental friction, where you have to make a decision, execute on the decision, and then assess it. How did that go? Well, shit, I backpedaled and I fell over and the guy ended up on top of me and stabbed me. All right. Okay. Well, what could we do differently? All right, let's get up, run it again. Okay. Put some cognitive friction on it. Now situation comes into it. Oh, I turned my hips. I made space, but I ran into a wall and I ran out of space, and the guy, okay, cool. So now we need to, so it's not a series of techniques. It's a series of baseline concepts and understanding. So I think at some point, I know I went a little bit far on this one, but I think at some point you were saying, like, are there some basic like SOPs or basic concepts and principles we can get in? Knives suck. Stay away from them. If you are close and you can turn and run to make that space, then yes, turn and run to make that space. If you're going to do that, you need to actually turn and run. If you can find a barrier, like in that case with that officer, if he could have got back to his car and played run around the car, to make that space, maybe that's an obstruction that slows things down and puts things to his favor. If I can't get there, learning not to just go to the gun for the sake of going to the gun. Like, going to the gun should be a decision. It should be a very quick decision. It should be a trained decision, but it should be a decision. It shouldn't be a reaction to any bad situation in close quarters. So learning how to separate that and train that out is a big deal, so that your hands can actually be defensive and deal with stuff. And then, to steal directly from Craig Douglas is understanding the skills to stay standing and stay conscious. So if you're in, I don't care what the fight is, but if you go to the ground, it's going to be that much worse. Unless you go to the ground on your terms and you're on top. So try to stay standing. If I'm, get knocked out or get shoved into something and now I'm unconscious, well, it doesn't matter how good you are at fighting. So stay standing, stay conscious. But all of the answers to all of this stuff comes from consistent, repetitive training. a physical training, hands-on, not theoretical training, not watching videos, not doing PowerPoints. It comes down to, if I want to turn and run, then get out and start running some 100 and 200 meter sprints and repeats. Because if you can't run, don't talk to me about running. You know how many people on the internet comment like just run, and then you look at their page and you go like, bro, like who are you outrunning? You know what I mean? It's like, well, and then I would get to my gun. It's like, man, if you watched any real life video of any of this stuff going on, it's like you need a physical skill to access the tools once you're inside of this. Guns aren't meant to be used where the thing you're trying to shoot can touch you. You know what I mean? It's like they're just not built that way. So learning how to access and work inside of that space, it's a physical skill set, and there's no way around it. You have to physically train repetitively over and over again. So SOPs, turn and run, that's one big one. We see people backpedal a lot. In training, we see people backpedal a lot. And thankfully for us, it's just shock knives and, force on force rounds. But in real life, that's going to be a bad day. Keeping the hands up until it's absolutely like a clear decision to get the gun out and deal with that, whenever we can. Those are big ones. And then you're going to need a skill set to be able to wrestle, grapple, control in some form or fashion, and, break things if you need to break things. So, if you can't throw some heavy elbows and some punches, it's going to be a bad day. That was a really long answer to that one, man.
No, it was a great answer because it's
clear-cut answers. Yeah.
Well, in shooting, when we're teaching folks to shooting, I think it's a little bit easier to set some clear standards and goals and checkpoints, right? It's like, okay, hey, you shot this drill in X amount of time, and we spent 50 to 100 rounds working on it, and you progressed this much. And it sounds like this is more of a journey deal where there is no destination in sight. It's you have to be better tomorrow than you were today. Otherwise, there's gonna be a little bit of regression there, and that's one of the things that I like with David is, man, that dude is always freaking training, and I'm like, man, I'm like, dude, you're at the range again. You're at jiu-jitsu again, man. That's freaking, that's pretty awesome to see, because it is one of those things where, we tend to, oh, hey, I have my handgun on me. It's this magical talisman, right? That it's going to ward off all evil, and we completely neglect the fact that, hey, the bad guy doesn't know you have that thing on you. So how the hell is it going to dispel this evil spirit before they attack you? Well, it's not going to. I want to talk to David. What were some of the obstacles that you had, or some of the failure points that you had in this class?
Really the biggest was working the shirt grabs. I've worked clinches and pummeling and head control and bicep ties and wrist ties, but I'd never really worked with shirt grabs. I didn't grow up playing hockey. I didn't have any of these other things. And so having somebody manipulating my shirt, either as the attacker or when I was trying to attack them, and they're standing me up, snapping me down, moving me left, moving me right. It was a different environment than I'd ever really trained with before. And so it came home, and we do a lot of shirt work now, and moving people around and trying to help other people understand that once somebody grabs hold of your clothes, that's a whole different, and it's different than jiu-jitsu. It's different than a gi, because the gi is rigid, and so they get it, and you kind of move. You grab a t-shirt, and there's some give, and then some spring, some recoil to it, and so they can really get some momentum and snap you around with a t-shirt or a hoodie, things like that. They have more give than a traditional gi from jiu-jitsu, which I'm much more familiar with. And so really that was the big takeaway in the class, was learning that just because I've had people grab my gi before, it's not the same as grabbing my street clothes.
Hey, David, I want to ask a little bit more on that, because this is, Jeremy and I have talked about this to nauseum about how we need to get our asses into some kind of hands-on thing, So talking about the gi versus clothes, right? And it's just, I think it's more a curiosity question for me. So, you train with a gi nonstop. As you mentioned, they're rigid. It's not the same as a t-shirt and jeans. You use that skill, and then I'm trying to frame this question right. So use this skill, and then let's say you're over at Texas Roadhouse and you get involved in the parking lot there of a fight, right? What makes it more beneficial? Knowing how to defend and fight in a gi, does it make it easier on street clothes, or is it vice versa?
I wouldn't say it makes it easier. It's different. People are like, well, yeah, you have the camps, USPSA, IDPA, gi, no gi. You have these camps that, well, you're not wearing a gi on the street. No, but you're wearing clothes. So I have handles, I have grips, because unless you're, a meth head running around naked, you're going to be wearing something. And so I have grips. In the no-gi side, typically it's going to be a rash guard or, bare chested deal. And so you're having to use natural grips. You're on the bicep, you're on the wrist, you're under the arm with an underhook, you're in a tie plum holding the neck. But those are still grips. And so it's not a better or worse. It's different. And you have to train in the gi, in street clothes, and in no gi, so that you have experienced those different environments. It's really no different than going to the range and shooting bullseye, because I want to be technically proficient at pressing the trigger and working my grip, and then working from an outside the waistband holster, because I just want to work on my draw stroke and my movement, and then working from inside the waistband, because that's how I carry. And so it's a progression and understanding the differences, but also the similarities. I mean, my appendix draw stroke is almost identical to my outside the waistband draw stroke, and it's that way on purpose, so that I don't have to learn two different draw strokes. I do the same thing no matter what I'm doing. And so I try to do the same with my grappling. I try to get my grappling to be the same, whether I'm in clothes, street clothes, or a gi, or working no gi.
Thanks. Jeremy's always trying to do no shirt wrestling with me after the range, and I figured maybe it had something to do with it, so I didn't know. So I was just trying to get to it.
He's trying to educate you.
Well, no, it's because in New Mexico, Albuquerque specifically, we have naked meth heads. So.
Also true.
That's what it is. We're preparing for real life over here, man.
See, so when I bring that reference up at my next course, and they say, "Where are you seeing naked?" I'm going to say Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Dave, we're doing the whole course shirtless in June.
Right. What is it about? Aaron, I want you to expand on that a little bit. What is it about the shirt grabs? Is it because it creates a lever? Where? Because if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like shirt grabs will amplify your ability to control somebody. And what is it about the shirt grab that does that?
So they can, again, it comes down to who's doing it and who's receiving it type deal. But there's a couple of things when you come into knife situations. If you watch video, there are plenty of cases of grabs, posts, frames, smacks, and hits before the stab. So it's common. And so to enter into a training session and not discuss some type of a shirt grab variable or a framing variable is it's just disingenuous. You're not actually learning what these fights look like. So one, it's very common. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it needs to somehow be plugged in our opinion, it needs to somehow be plugged into training at a relatively decent rate. So one, it's just got to be in there. Two, it can give very, very good options if you know what you're doing and if you've done it before. And grabbing onto people's shirts that's not new. I mean, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, which is like Northeast Ohio, and a perfectly fine neighborhood and things like that, but we were close enough to the hood, and we got in scraps and all that type of stuff. I mean, people were pulling people's shirts over their head and punching them when I was 13. You know what I mean? It's not like it's something that is so far-fetched, right? And it happens all the time. So dealing with it, understanding how to address it if it happens to you, and then how to utilize it becomes a pretty big part of it. Now, the section that Dave took in Florida was explicitly on shirt grabs, dealing with whether it's a hoodie, a jacket, a t-shirt, doesn't matter, exploring the defensive and offensive options for dealing with a shirt grab. In KCC, we teach, or the KCC1, we teach elements of it. We expand on it in KCC2. But the reality of it is it's learning when it's a problem and when it's not. Because that's another thing too, is just because somebody's holding onto your shirt doesn't mean they have control. It means they have potential to make things a little, worse for you. But there's plenty of videos that I can show you where it's like, man, if that dude just committed to what was happening, that shirt grab wouldn't have done anything. But again, they don't know what they don't know type deal. So it's knowing when a shirt grab is actually a problem versus when it's not, and then just, deal with what we're dealing with. How to take advantage of shirt grabs, because if you reach out and grab onto me, if you look at that from a grappling perspective, you just gave me an attachment. So think about it. Imagine, right? If I'm just kind of posting and framing on you and I'm stabbing and I don't really give you an opportunity to grab onto me and I'm just keep my space and I stab and I pull away and I stab and I pull away, getting a connection can be relatively complicated. But if you reach out and you grab my shirt and you frame, technically you gave me something to hold on to start controlling you. I just need to learn how to flip that in my head. Most people look at it and they go, oh crap, they're controlling me. I want to be able to look at it and go, well, technically they're giving me a gift too, because I don't need to attach to that side of the body. I can actually attach to this side of the body and get to where I need to go and start to get that down. So it's learning the pros and cons, or the assets and liabilities is the better way, I think, to look at it, of somebody grabbing onto your shirt. That's piece number one. And then piece number two is to, again, if I'm going to control, and we see this on the internet all the time with like 2-on-1s and baseball back grip, and people, they want to say like, oh, that'll never work. You'll never be able to hold that. And it's like, well, don't get me wrong. Holding a baseball bat grip on bare flesh, especially if somebody's already been cut and there's blood involved, or we're sweating, or it's wet and rainy out, yeah, it's super freaking complicated. But if you're wearing a long sleeve shirt, there's some good grips there if I learn how to utilize them. And to David's point, it's a little different than a gi, but a gi with its stiffness isn't much different than a Carhartt jacket. It's not different than a nice stiff jacket that you might have on some cases. But you start getting into t-shirts, and now there's some tricks to utilizing a t-shirt. When I grab onto your shirt, I don't just want to hold on to it. I actually want to hold on to it and kind of twist it a little bit, because that starts to create more tension on it and gives me a little bit more control. Little elements and pieces like that, how to push people by. And then the more you play with it, we don't do this in our normal courses, but the more you play with it, you get really good at shutting people down with their own clothing. And if I can shut a situation down, if I can pull a dude's shirt over his head while he's trying to stab me and kill a lot of his visibility, be able to break his posture down and put him down into the floor, that's a huge asset. It's not a technique, right? It's not like, hey, if somebody tries to stab you, just grab the back of their shirt and pull it over their head. It's like, no. I got to learn how to fight. I got to learn what this looks like mechanically to make sure that happens and try to figure that out. But man, if I can make that happen, that's a huge asset. Why would you not want to take away the eyesight of somebody trying to stab you? You know what I mean? And so it's a good asset to have into it. So again, taking it back to your question, to not look at grabbing material is foolish, offensively and defensively. One, because bad guys do it sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And two, if it's an asset that helps me control another person when I can't get away, assuming I can't run away from the entanglement, well, then I want to learn every ounce of how to slow somebody down, how to control somebody, especially if they're bigger. Holy crap, if they're bigger and stronger than you, because that's a whole nother variables, or a subset of variables that people want to talk about. Again, with jiu-jitsu, size doesn't matter in jiu-jitsu. The hell it doesn't. I'm going to be competing in Nashville on IBJJF this weekend, and I can tell you right now, there's weight classes and age divisions. Size matters, right? So it's just understanding the reality of that. If there is something I can learn in a gross motor, applicable, practical way, then I want to know how to do that. And shirt grabs are just such an asset, again, outside of the naked meth head. But that's what no-gi training's for. You learn how to use that dude's flesh to hold on to and to hook onto in its own weird, messed up ways. But if they've got clothes, Maybe the meth head is wearing tighty whities. I will use tighty whities and I will control you and lift you up off the ground and dump you on your head if I have to. So it's an asset to learn to get into. I don't think it's the first piece, and it's a reason why we touch on it in KCC1, but it's not a huge nugget of it. But it is definitely something that I think you should learn how to manipulate the body first, right? It's like when I used to teach the active shooter courses, I would always tell people, like, look, your plan for self-defense, in this case especially, should be that you are butt naked, no one's going to help you, and you have zero tools. Like, that's what the foundation of your self-defense plan should be. So, hey, somebody's going to, shoot up my work. Okay. Assume you don't have any tools. No one's going to help you. And you have to do this, butt ass naked. You can't do anything else about it. Learn how to do that. And then if I add a med kit, that's icing on the cake. If I add a firearm, that might be icing on the cake. If somebody decides to assist me and is a willing participant in that fight, that's icing on the cake. But if you ever rely on something that might not be there, and then you get stuck in a situation where that thing's not there, and that was your game, then you're screwed. So we don't do shirt grabs day one. We do shirt grabs after we've taught the basic mechanics of how to manipulate, move, transition, and control around a body. And then it's like, hey, all these things that were relatively difficult to do, especially when somebody doesn't want you to do it, now start grabbing onto the shirt and see how that changes things. It's like, it's eye-opening. So that's where, again, that progression we talked about earlier, progression of material, becomes really important. Or at least I think so.
I know jiu-jitsu is, I don't know if it's all the rage right now, but I know a lot of folks are on the jiu-jitsu, in the jiu-jitsu camp, right? And I believe part of that is because it's widely available, right? There's a ton of popularity around it. There's a ton of good use cases for it. If we're looking at from a purely self-defense standpoint, this isn't something that I want to compete in. This isn't something that I necessarily want to have to dedicate hours every week to kind of progressing my skill set, even though that might be the best case scenario, right? But for a lot of folks, it's like, hey, I can't commit 3 hours a week or 2 hours a week to working on this, because it's very unlikely that I'm going to need this ever in my life. But B, everybody has their own stuff going on. Is there, if we're from a purely self-defense standpoint, is jiu-jitsu the best option that we have because it's widely available? Or is there another martial art or another self-defense kind of training methodology that we could look at prior to getting into like the knife defense stuff? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, totally. Jiu-jitsu is uber popular for various reasons. Now, one, it is widely available, but you got to remember it's only widely available because it became popular, right? Those two have to go hand in hand, or else we wouldn't, half of these gym owners wouldn't be making any money. They wouldn't be able to keep their doors open. So it has grown severely popular, obviously, since UFC. And they love to quote the Gracie challenge fights and UFC 1 and all that type of stuff. And it's all fantastic. It's great stuff, but it's grown in popularity over the years. Now, I think a lot of people are drawn to it for various reasons. First and foremost, and this is from a business standpoint too, right? Like, again, I own a brick and mortar building here. You have to understand the business side of things, right? It's not all just like, oh, I like doing this, so let's get it done. It's like, well, what's going to get people through the door? There's a couple things about jiu-jitsu that are really fascinating. First and foremost, in the hands of a good instructor and a good community, and that's not always the case, right? Every gym's different, but in the hands of a good instructor and a good community, it's accessible to all age groups. So unlike kickboxing, right? It's really hard to do kickboxing into your later years and actively spar because you're taking trauma with hits. With rolling and jiu-jitsu in a good community in the hands of appropriate instructor, you can roll until you're dead, essentially is what it comes down to, because you can change and manipulate the pace. It can be a relatively soft art as things go, and you can still continue to progress in it. So that's one thing that I think really draws people to jiu-jitsu, is that it's doable. And sometimes, even though if you're doing it at a high level competitive and you're going really hard, it's an exhausting and potentially injurious hobby. However, if you know, when you're, mentally you're calm enough to be like, hey bro, I just want to flow roll. I'm 50 years old. I've got a bad hip. I'm trying to just get a better well-being. I got kids at home and a job. You can go into it and you can train it for a very long time. So I think that attracts people, especially people that have lost, hey, I played football in high school and college, and then I haven't had that sense of athleticism and that sense of competition and that sense of being around a team in a long time. It's like you find a community of people that are learning this new thing. So it's fascinating. There's another element to it. There's a progression deal. It's a black belt and you get stripes and there's levels, right? So there's, something you can earn and get out of it. So there's the human satisfaction that comes from the belt ranking system that comes in jiu-jitsu. And that's a thing. We run into that problem with our self-defense program because like we had to, it used to just be like, look, I'm here to teach self-defense. You shouldn't necessarily care about your belts and your ranks and all this other type of stuff. It's like, if you got attacked today, can you or can you not defend yourself? But the problem with that is the only way to get people good at defending themselves is to keep them training continuously and consistently over a long period of time. So you have to play the game of like, okay, like how do I play with your ADD and your dopamine levels to keep you to come back to feel good about yourself, but also to feel challenged. And there's a progression to that. People want the stripes. They want the stars. They want the satisfaction levels. They want to walk around and say, I'm a purple belt. You're a white belt. You're trash. I'm awesome. Like there's a level to that that's exciting. And BJJ gives you that. You're not going to necessarily get that in kickboxing per se. Now, Krav Maga's got levels, but that's a whole other thing. But the reality of it is that's an element to it. I think the third reason jiu-jitsu is so popular right now is it never ends. It never ends. And that's a fascinating element because you can't, you never reach the end line. So even when you get a black belt, like most people that just get their black belt, they might know 30% of the art of jiu-jitsu of what's actually out there. And that's a fascinating concept. So now all of that, does it make it a good self-defense system? If you don't have access to anything else and it's going to keep you on the mats and you're going to physically train and maybe lose 20 pounds and live a healthier lifestyle and, get pressure tested, at least in the elements of grappling, well then, yeah, go do it. It's good. Is it a holistic self-defense program? No, it doesn't matter. I don't care who says whatever they want. I run a BJJ program at my gym. I have a black belt there. His name's Mike Chaney. He's one of the coaches with Knife Control Concepts. He's my jiu-jitsu instructor. And he's phenomenal. And we run it as a jiu-jitsu program because it's not self-defense. And we have a self-defense program, which is separate of it. The self-defense program entails, verbalization skills, right? Or as like Craig Douglas would say, like muck, managing unknown contacts, verbal judo. It involves medical. Like when's the last time you went to your jiu-jitsu studio and they taught you how to put tourniquets on? Okay, well then you're not learning self-defense and self-protection if you're not learning how to plug holes in your body that might potentially, you're learning gun defense, but you're not going to learn how to plug the hole that eventually is going to, make you bleed out. So there needs to be the verbalization. There needs to be the psychological side of it, the mindset. To your point, Andy, you asked a great question, or you mentioned, Ray talking about the knife and not wanting to carry a knife anymore because how messed up it is. That's a level of psychological mindset. Like if tomorrow a 15-year-old kid pulled a gun on you, could you bludgeon a 15-year-old kid to death if it meant you or them? That's like, you have to have those conversations. Can you carry it? Oh, I carry a knife. Okay. Can you see yourself plunging metal into a human, which you have to do at close quarters, feeling blood, their blood, another person's internal human fluids on your arm, potentially seeing them die and dealing with the psychological, legal, or potentially legal and potentially civil aspects that come with that? Well, if you're not there to do that, then don't go around training Kali and acting like a super knife master. It's like, no. So self-defense, in my opinion, and again, this is just my theory on it, self-defense is the lens you view survival through. And I take elements and skills from wrestling. I take elements and skills from jiu-jitsu. I take elements and skills from kickboxing. I take elements and skills from verbalization and improvisation. I take elements and skills from breath work and mind setting and ice baths and all the woo-woo crazy crap. And, skills from firearms and skills from all that. And I look at it through, out of these programs, what elements are going to get me home safe that fit my body type, my context, my intentions, my lifestyle, and what I'm actually going to spend time getting good at. And then take those things and how do they apply to me being able to access them? To me, that's self-defense. So I don't think there's a perfect program. I think it really is going to come down to the individual. I have no doubt that I know for a fact, there are amazing BJJ black belts that have great combative backgrounds and great combative mindsets. I mean, John Valentine, Cliff, all the guys that were at the summit. I mean, good Lord, I think I counted at one point in time and there was like 36 jiu-jitsu black belts, but they were all there to train combatives because they know jiu-jitsu is not self-defense, right? So long story short, if it's the only thing you have access to and you'll actually do it, then go do it. It's better off than not doing anything. If you can only access kickboxing, then go access kickboxing. Learn how to break people, you know what I mean, to some certain degree, and then maybe grab a buddy and fight over a knife and just try to figure that out. Nowadays, if you have a training partner, I mean, it's 2024, man. You can download anything you want off the internet right now and learn it if you care enough, if it's an actual priority and you can find a training partner. So in those cases, I would hunt out, people that have combatives backgrounds, people that are looking at, different mixtures of wrestling and kickboxing and things like that from a pragmatic standpoint. And then just as you're going through it, just ask yourself, like, can I actually physically pull this crap off realistically? I usually say, you use Greco-Roman, you use kickboxing skills from an open hand standpoint. Use kickboxing skills to keep people away and beat them up and break them down and maybe knock them unconscious. You use Greco-Roman wrestling skills to stay standing and control somebody. You use wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, maybe some judo to put somebody on the floor intentionally if you have to. You use wrestling to stay on top and in control. If you can't stay on top and in control, the elements of jiu-jitsu is to get the hell off your back and get back on top, to me, is the way you look at it. So if you are going to go into a jiu-jitsu studio, if that's the thing you have best access to, my basic kind of tip to everybody is stay on top. Because jiu-jitsu players, we love to be on the bottom sometimes. We get really comfortable playing guard, playing off our back, doing weird shit that isn't applicable to self-defense. So stay on top, stay in control, learn your takedowns. If you end up on your back, learn how to get back on top. And if you spend the majority of your time doing that, staying on top, controlling the standing game, and if you're on your back, getting the hell back on top, then you're doing the best version of jiu-jitsu for self-defense. If you're pulling, and I got no problem calling them out, but if you're pulling like Henry Gracie stuff where you're in mount and you're dropping to arm bars for the sake of throwing arm bars and weird stuff like that, I don't think it's realistic and applicable. And that's the problem, is sport jiu-jitsu is way more fun than self-defense jiu-jitsu for most people. I think it's the other way around, because I got force-on-force guns and shock knives, and it gets pretty exciting when you start fighting on the ground with those, but that's just me. So that's my long-winded explanation of jiu-jitsu is awesome. It's great. It's fantastic. 16% of the art of jiu-jitsu is applicable to self-defense. It's an arbitrary number, completely made up, but you get the idea. There's a lot of jiu-jitsu that's just not self-defense,
Sweet. So final question for me. I just got full dental implants in here a few months ago. It's still pretty fresh. Working on the healing part, and I'm looking at your June class here in Albuquerque or Rio Rancho, and I'm like, can Andy take that safely? And so, of course, there'd be a question to the dentist. That'd be the first question. Yep. It's like, hey, can I do that? But it's leading into my question is, we ask, what students can take this, what levels we can do, but are there limitations as far as physical ability that you don't want to see somebody in the class? Like, can somebody come in a wheelchair that can't walk? Can they take this class? Can it be anybody? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I can take the concepts that we're drilling and apply them to anybody in a group setting to keep the pace of the class, right? To keep things moving. Then we start getting into, okay, well, how many adjustments do we need to make inside of this? So to be completely honest, anybody could walk through the door, and I've worked with plenty of people that are, in wheelchairs, plenty of people with amputations, upper body, lower body, stuff like that. And it can be done and they can train into it. With them, I just suggest, hey, bring a training partner that knows what they're getting into and that is okay with making adjustments in this, because we have to hit certain checkpoints on a timeline to make sure that everybody gets the information they're supposed to be getting. Realistically, the person that's going to get the most out of a group setting is simply just going to be somebody that is willing and can move. It doesn't have to be at a fast pace, but is willing and can move at a decent pace for, 5 hours. And we give breaks every hour on the hour, and you don't have to be incredible. You can take breaks whenever you need to. All that stuff's fine. So I don't mind if people take breaks and stop. In fact, we encourage it. I'd rather you slow down and be able to process information to then train it later, than to run yourself into the ground and not be able to continue. But at the end of the day, as long as you're willing to come in to learn something and to move through 2 pretty long days, you're 100% welcome. If there's an extreme limitation, I think in those cases, if you have a really good training partner that's willing to work with you throughout that, I can convert this stuff quickly, and also look at you in some cases and go like, look, man, these next 2 sections are not for you. And this is going to be the adjustment you have to make. And it's just because that's a completely different game plan. But those cases, they're also going to get a lot more out of like, hey, I watched the course, I took the course, and like, let's do a one-on-one maybe for an hour and really dive into some of the mechanics that come into this. Because, if 20 people are in the class, the only person that understands the struggles of being in a wheelchair is the one person in the wheelchair. You know what I mean? So it's going through those cases for them. It's really cool to be able to follow that up and say, hey, let's do like 1 hour together, one-on-one or with a training partner. And then, okay, what did you get out of this? How do we adjust it for your application? But to your specific answer, definitely talk to your dentist. However, you can move at whatever pace you want for the entirety of the class. And you're not getting punched. That's one of the perks of KCC1 is there's no impact. There's no punches, there's no headbutts. KCC2, different story. You're getting hit. But KCC1 is all grappling based. So the impact to the teeth and things like that is not going to be a problem. Now, I will say there's a drill on day 2 where it's a very aggressive, like smash and pressing across the jawline with the hip bones. I would just say, hey, bow out of that one as the guy on the bottom. You know what I mean? And we'll just part you up in a group of 3 and let's just not mess with that. But otherwise, there's nothing in the curriculum that's going to impair your teeth in any way, shape, or form. But again, obviously clear that with your dentist because I'm not a dentist.
Clear it with Sherman House, Andy. Dr. Sherman House.
That'd be a solid choice.
Yeah, it reminds me of it. We had a student years ago in one of our defensive handgun courses, and we were working on some movement stuff, and she was asking questions and said, hey, if you're in a situation where you're using your gun, you're not moving, right? Like if you're just not, that's not, I was like, show me how you're going to move and get to your gun and all that other stuff. So it's kind of working through that process, and it was like, hey, okay, so now what other considerations do you have to make? Understanding that your mobility is limited, and that fight looks a little bit different than somebody who isn't in a wheelchair. So it's pretty awesome to hear you.
I mean, if we're honest, it's a lot different.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest, you go back to the mindset side of things, and I'll make this quick, but being honest about your physical ability, I think, is the first piece of everything. And it's not a matter of like, oh shit, like I can't do that. It's like, no. It's not that you can't. Every person should be trained up to the highest ability of their, potential. There's no excuse for it. You know what I mean? But it's very different. To say otherwise is again, it's just a little foolish. I worked with a company that I did active shooter training for, they all, were disability, whether it was a physical or a mental in any way, shape, or form. We had blind, we had hearing impaired, everything went into it. And it's like, look, if you can't hear, it's a different game to listen and figure out what's going on. So you have to pick up in different ways. If you can't see, well, where are you turning and running to? It's like, no, it's like, oh, wow, I'm getting stabbed. I have to connect to this person because I can't just turn and run. And the only way that I can start to see through touch, tactile, is to get a hold of them, right? So it's a whole different ball game. And so just being able to go, hey, these are my limitations. I understand they're my limitations, and I'm willing to work with those limitations. Dude, I will drop anything I'm doing and work with anybody that can walk through the door in those cases, and just admit it. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, it's going to be it's a shitty fight if I'm able-bodied. Like I'm I'll be 38 next month. I'm youngish. I haven't hit 40 yet, but I'm able-bodied. I'm athletic. I train a ton. And if some, idiot with a knife in his 20s decides that he wants to stab me and take my money, that's not going to be an easy fight for me. let alone, again, if you're working off of disability or some type of situation. So. I broke him.
No, sorry, I was trying to type this up because it's you're a couple hours ahead of us already, and don't want to steal the rest of your evening away. But I do want to ask probably the laziest question. I'm going to kick it over to David and then kick it up to you, Aaron. David, is there anything that we should have talked about that we haven't discussed with regards to this course?
No. I mean, the fact of the matter is you just need to show up. Sort of goes back to your question. I mean, back to your question about, there's not enough time and I don't have enough. If you have interest, you'll make time. And for this course, you show up in your street clothes, in your gym clothes, in your workout clothes, and training aids are all provided. You don't have to bring anything. You just have to show up with an open mind and a notebook, hopefully, and take the class. So no, I don't think there's anything that we missed as far as that goes. Again, back to your question, if the only thing you have time for is to go out and walk for half an hour every day, then go out and walk for half an hour every day and get in shape, because getting in shape is going to be the number one thing you can do to protect yourself from any problem.
I love it. Aaron, over to you. Is there anything that we should have discussed that we haven't covered before we wrap it up?
No, that was, great across the board. I love the questions. I really enjoy this format, by the way, because it's very cool to get David's perspective on things. That's neat. It's the first time I've had the opportunity to hash that out with somebody that's actually trained, with me. So that's super cool. No, I thought it was great. I think you can tell, I could talk for 7 hours and you could ask any questions you wanted to. I think you guys asked great questions and across the board, I think we hit a lot of stuff that people can chew on and either like or not like. That's really on them. But at the end of the day, I think, everything today that we talked about was great. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, the more talking that our guests do, the better the episodes are. So I appreciate you carrying it for us tonight.
I'm Italian, man. I can't stop talking sometimes.
Well, we were gonna wrap, but we got to get in our show sponsors in, and I want to ask you two somewhat quick hitter questions, I guess, so we can give you your time back. So, Locked In Grip, we use that. It's a liquid sports shock for firearms and other things. Would that provide any benefit in a class like this, or knife fighting or anything? Is there any way that it would be able to be worked in for that, or would it just be simply probably not?
For training? I'll tell you right now, psychologically, if some dude came up on you and was like, I'm going to stab you, and you pulled out a mouth guard and then started putting chalk on your hands before you fought him, I think psychologically that would do wonders for you.
That may, yeah.
They'd probably be like, holy shit, this guy's prepared. Never mind. I picked the wrong dude.
In that vein,
good.
Are there any things that would make training that would enhance the training experience for somebody? Like David's taking this class and he's talking about taking this class. Is there anything that they could bring with them to, improve the training experiance for themselves?
Yeah,
other than those whitey tighties from the med heads.
I was about to say that.
I'm gonna tell you right now, man. I have a series of Instagram videos going through my head right now. So yeah, it's one of those things. We like to keep the training as stripped down as possible, because if you start getting in with this area of self-defense in general, but in this area, if we start gamifying it too much, the farther we get away from realistic situations, the more it starts becoming like a codified martial art. You know what I mean? And so it's one of those cases where it's like, look, if I know I'm going to do a controlled setting, and I'm going to do, let's say in this case, I'm going to do a bunch of double leg shots. I'm going to practice my shot and I got, crappy knees. It's like, sure, throw on some knee sleeves, something that's going to support you in that case. But realistically, from a self-defense standpoint, if you're not going to slide knee sleeves on before you defend yourself and your family, it's like you should be pretty stripped down to whatever you would naturally be like. So when we go out, like Dave was talking about, you know, you can wear shorts and a rash guard, you can wear 5'11" jeans and a whatever you want. I don't care. Just show up, you know, ready to fight another human being. And then inside of that context, like if you want to wear a trainer gun, you're not going to touch it. But if you want to wear it to feel what it would be like, hey, this is how I carry, you know, that's fine. But it's not that course. So just keep that in your mind, right? As you're going to play with that type of stuff. So I would say come as realistically as possible. And that's not to say that you can't in training sessions add some nuggets to it and some little pieces that could make training a little bit tighter. But realistically, man, like a $10 plastic training knife and the will to actually fail and learn goes, you know, way farther than most training implements. And you're talking to somebody that has tens of thousands of dollars of training implements at his facility. So it's kind of a hypocritical thing to say, but when we travel, I travel around with like little plastic Sharky knives. And I mean, I've run courses with crushed up water bottles as knives, man. You know what I mean? So we're pretty stripped down. So long story short, I mean, it would help from an offensive standpoint. Like if I was doing Kali or I was doing a ton of reps with a blade, I could totally see how putting some liquid chalk on would be amazing. Because that's like one of the biggest things is like the fatigue of the hand, the sweat in the palms, knife goes flying when you're training. From a defensive standpoint, I hope that shit goes flying. Like I hope the bad guy loses his grip on the knife and you have an incidental disarm, which is more realistic than most of the disarms you're going to see in, you know, Filipino martial arts.
I guess the cool thing, yeah, sure. I guess the cool thing about a locked-in grip when you get the little bottle, it comes with a carabiner clip, so you can just clip that on your belt. You're about to go to town. You just grab a quick squirt, rub it on, then get to go.
I'm telling you. But I mean, you can take that thing off. Like you pin them like what you do, like the pinning on day 2. You could be pinning them in the ground and pull that stuff out and just jam it in their eyes.
Rub it in their another way to use it.
I could find some great ways to use it.
Rub it in there. That's awesome. Thanks. And then the second one for Range Buddy, Jeremy's done a great job adding drill of the month or any kind of certain drills, steel challenge drills, you name it. He has it on there. He's created now a virtual coaching system to where if somebody wants to go on and get some online coaching, they can reach out to the instructor. We're going to edit that out. I guess it hasn't been released. Anyway, is there something that Jeremy can add to the Range Buddy drill system that he can use with what you teach? Is there any kind of certain drills or anything that you can share on that?
Yeah, that would be that's a really cool question and a really cool thought. Because I've got my interpretation, like what I teach my students of transferring between the open hand skills, dealing with a blade to getting the firearm out. In those cases, it would be interesting to actually, you know, get those out of my own brain and kind of throw those at and you know, y'all be able to play around with it. But I imagine there'd be some really, really cool ways to be able to break out of an entanglement and access a gun and do some timing things based off that would be really interesting. So that's a good one. I don't know the exact answer to it, but it's one of those ones that makes me go like, ooh, that could be a lot of fun. If that was a thing, because it's not a thing.
Yeah. So the Range Buddy app is, and you know, we're getting, it's not a huge issue. I'll edit it out in the post, but I was hoping to roll out that announcement or the updates and stuff and be ready to go today, but we're trying to get some more folks onboarded. But yeah, I'm super excited about that. You know, I'd imagine David would find a ton of value in the next big update that we're going to roll out.
Spoiled.
Spoiler alert. No big deal. No worries. I'm close enough to the finish line now where I'm not too worried about, you know, somebody beating me to market with it. Really, the only holdup now is getting some folks onboarded into that deal to where they can, you know, so that I have the supply side figured out. That way, you know, if David opens up the app tomorrow, he can actually use it for its intended purpose. So hopefully here in the next couple of days, that'll be live and ready to go. And then it would have been really cool if I could have rolled it out at the Range Master Conference, but I didn't go and it's not quite ready yet. So, but definitely appreciate you guys jumping on and giving us your evening. It was a great conversation. You know, it's one of these topics where, I don't think we've had a similar course reviewed. We've done some unarmed stuff, but I think this is a very valid course. It kind of fits in with what our viewers and our listeners would be into. So thank you so much for joining us, Aaron and David. Really do appreciate it. Can't thank you enough for giving us your evening. For our listeners, thank you for joining us. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe. Oh, yeah, David, pimp the class. Pimp the class. I got you right here, too. Go ahead, David. Anybody there?
Did we lose him?
I think we might have. What David was
I'll pimp the
going...
class.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
We will be, Knife Control Concepts will be in New Mexico, June 22nd, 23rd. We'll be doing a 2-day KCC1 Foundations of Control. There's Dave. Foundations of Control class. Day 1 is all stand up. Day 2 is all on the ground. It's 6 hours both days, $349 for both days. Yeah. And then you want to add anything to that, Dave? Did you hear all that?
Yeah, so that's going to be at Next Move Jiu-Jitsu, 3301 Suite 501 in Rio Rancho on the 22nd, 23rd, like Aaron said. Also, I host a combative study group twice a month, and you can find me at on Facebook. I'll make sure I give all my contact information to Jeremy to put in the show notes here. But I mean, if you're local to Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, and you want to work combatives twice a month, it's that few hours a month that you have. If that's all you got, come see us in the study group, and post KCC, we'll be incorporating that stuff into the study group. So it's an opportunity to get together and train with like-minded folks.
Yeah, it's cool, man. It's cool watching what y'all do. Might have to, Andy will have to drag me out there one of these days. So remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe. We'll see you next week.